It's the Anime Movie Podcast with your hosts, Kat and Joe. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Anime Movie Podcast. I'm Joe Welke.
I'm Kat Hamilton.
And today we're talking about a 2015 movie, Psycho-Pass the movie. Now, this is associated with a series, the Psycho-Pass series. It has its own world. It has its own OVAs. It's got a series that take place before this movie. It's got series that take place after this movie. It's a whole little Psycho-Pass cinematic universe. But this movie is directed by Naoyoshi Shiotani and Katsuyuki Motohiro. And Motohiro is serving as the chief director, and it is co-written by Gen Urobuchi and Makoto Fukami. And Gen Urobuchi is he's a pretty famous writer, dude. He writes a lot of really great anime series. He wrote the original Psycho-Pass anime. He wrote Fate Zero.
I didn't know he was the same guy who did Fate Zero.
Yeah, he was also co-creator of Madoka Magica. And he's won the Tokyo Anime Award for Best Scriptwriter. So this dude, he's got a good track record. And
so sorry, he's one of the co-writers.
Yes.
Yeah. Is that because Joe's the one who introduced me to this series and also to Fate Zero and Magica Modica.
Mm-hmm.
Did you discover it because of the writing connection in any way, or did they just happen to?
It just kind of happened, and then sometimes I'll watch videos online that are kind of breaking down what happened or analyzing the philosophy of something or the main point of all of these anime, and they always kind of reference the writer and be like, this is this guy's MO or whatever.
His shtick.
Yeah. So I've heard the name before. I know that people like his stuff, and he's got a pretty good track record. It seems like, Psycho-Pass is the series is very widely regarded as a really great series, at least the first season anyway. I remember when I was watching the second season and not enjoying it so much that when I went online to research it, a lot of people are like, the second season doesn't exist. We just don't accept that exists, and we're just going to pretend that it doesn't, because people were not happy with the second season, and with good reason. There's some screwy stuff going on in Psycho-Pass 2. I remember watching a dude, he had a 3-hour long video breaking down why it was such shit. And I watched the entire video, and he brought up a lot of really good points, but there was some really nitpicky stuff. But yeah, there were a lot of good points in that video. But Psycho-Pass the movie takes place after that second season. So the chronological order of all of the events that happen in Psycho-Pass are Psycho-Pass season 1, then Psycho-Pass 2, then this movie, and then there's a bunch of OVAs after this, then Psycho-Pass 3, and then I think that there's maybe one or two other OVAs. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit of the background for this movie.
And you were saying that the third season has sort of a new round of characters. It does that Grey's Anatomy thing where you see the young people coming up in their career, and then you kind of see the next generation coming up, because it's so much more interesting to look at the stories of people who are about to embark on some kind of a character arc, not the, wizened old inspectors who know what they're doing now.
Yeah, I think one of the through lines of all of the seasons, and possibly even the movies, I haven't seen the OVAs. I saw this movie, obviously, but there are a couple other OVAs that I haven't seen. But the main through line character is Akane Tsunemori, and you see her development as an inspector and all the trials and tribulations that she goes through. And I think that she's in Psychopaths 3, but not, she's in a lead role. Like she's kind of like an off, she's referenced and she'll show up every once in a while. Again, I haven't seen season 3.
But more of a supporting character.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so it sounds like, season 1 is the setup of the world. And then we start getting into the story. It took me so long to get into it. But once I was into it, I really enjoyed it. And then the second season, things have changed a little bit. There's a character that I really like that kind of disappears. And then the movie that we're about to talk about is a sequel to those two that brings back that character. It doesn't. Oh, that might get into spoilers. I'm going to cool off on that. And then that other season is kind of a new deal, but.
Do you want to explain kind of the world of Psychopaths, or would you?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to start out just by saying like that with some of the reading that I was doing, I found it interesting that this appears to not be based off of manga. This is just written as a series, which you don't see that often.
Yeah.
And it was in part conceived just being inspired by a lot of Mamoru Oshii's work, who did Urusei Yatsura too, which we'll release that episode at some point.
Yeah.
And also Ghost in the Shell. And then, apparently, the movie it had some kind of, Blade Runner influence, but, essentially it's this dystopian world that is technology heavy. And there's kind of a 1984 aspect to it. That's sort of like the beginning of it, at least. So you can kind of take it from there.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of what people liken it to is Minority Report, the movie with Tom Cruise, where, so in the world of Psychopaths, everything is run by this system called the Sibyl system. And it determines your hue, which basically is your psychological health and your mental health. And through that, it can determine whether you are a quote unquote latent criminal. And so we're following these inspectors, and you don't even need to be committing a crime, but they have these detectors that basically scan your mental health. And if it gets too, they say that your hue is cloudy, they bring you into like a rehabilitation program because you need to be helped. Sometimes it's you need to get into a rehabilitation program. Sometimes it's cause for execution immediately. Like immediate, they have these guns called Dominators. They point it at them. And if you're Psychopaths, your hue is super high, it's grounds for immediate execution. And you maybe you haven't even committed a crime yet. Not only that, the Sibyl system determines, your occupation. It tells you like what it thinks you'd be best at in your occupation based off of like these personality things and your mental health and quizzes, I guess. We see in this movie, I didn't know that this was a thing, but in this movie, it also functions as like a dating app. Like it sets you up with who it thinks that you'd be best with. So basically this whole entire country of Japan in 2116 is run by the Sibyl system. And that kind of presents this philosophical debate within the series, the movies, etc., about, do you have free will? Is everything determined by the Sibyl system correct? Is it right to arrest and execute people before they've even done anything? Do they have a chance to change? So it gets really complicated. Like the way that they present the Sibyl system is that it builds like a utopia because no one's committing crimes, but people are getting executed without committing a crime as well. And maybe they're being forced into jobs that they don't like, or just because the Sibyl system thought that it was best for them or whatever. So there's a lot of questions of the efficacy of the Sibyl system throughout the series and throughout this movie. There's also people that like fuck with the Sibyl system as well, and the Sibyl system is also very imperfect, and what the Sibyl system is an insane like twist in the series. I don't know if it's okay to spoil that twist.
I think after the spoiler section, well, as we've said in the past, there's nothing safe once you get to the spoiler section.
Yeah.
Including this whole series.
Yeah. But the way that the Sibyl system functions and what it actually is this insane thing that the first time I watched Psychopaths, the series, I was like, what the fuck is this? So weird and insane. But yeah, it's very interesting debates and philosophical stuff going on in it. And that's kind of the world of Psychopaths.
Yeah. And, not only is it the guns, the dominators that can test the hue of people, it's also sometimes just there are areas that are just constantly scanned. And it's basically like CCTV surveillance, but it's scanning people's hue.
Yeah, and the police, they have drones and they have like scanners on like light posts and everything. So,
and the drones are usually really ironically like chibi and adorable and very Japanese, but are also terrifying. And the dominators are an interesting weapon because they can lock up if somebody's hue isn't clouded as well. Which means that if there's a way to sort of fake it or kind of trick the Sibyl system, that those weapons become useless essentially. And in this film, we kind of they really emphasize the fact that this is just happening in Japan, and it's so isolated. We really don't know what's happening with the rest of the world, and they do say what year it is. It's something like
2116.
Okay. So about 100 years into the future. And so this film is the first time we're kind of seeing outside of Japan.
Yeah.
Which is pretty interesting. And the place where they go is starting to adopt the Sibyl system as well. But they don't have dominators. So it's a little bit different and less kind of controlled.
Yeah, the way that they implement the Sibyl system is like people that they've determined through the Sibyl system to be latent criminals are all wearing these collars. And if their hue gets too cloudy, there are like sedatives in the collar if it gets a little too cloudy. But then if it jumps super, super high, it has poison in the collars as well. So it'll just like execute them right then and there. And those people are second-class citizens in this world. They have all these like terrible jobs and everything's pretty shitty. And like the adoption of the Sibyl system, it's like the first of its kind coming outside of Japan. And the look that we get outside of Japan isn't positive. Like there definitely is like a dystopian thing. Like for as dystopian as the Sibyl system is, it looks like everything outside of Japan is fucked up beyond belief. And everything's war-torn. Maybe there was like a nuclear war or something that just ravaged the world.
At least in this area.
Yeah.
They do seem to make it sound like this place is a particularly problematic area. And I don't know if it's a representation of what's happening in the rest of the world.
Well, I know that our one of the characters mentions that he had traveled the world and just saw everything was terrible. And
okay.
But the place that they're going to is the Southeast Asia Union, or SEAN as they call it. But yeah, they also have this like kind of floating barge.
It kind of seems like it's supposed to be China or maybe Hong Kong. That it's, some of the names sound a little bit more Chinese than they do Japanese. But it seems like it's kind of like an island nation. So it kind of reminded me of Hong Kong, but it kind of sounds like there's some kind of a United Nations sort of thing happening with the Southeast Asian countries. But of course, there's all kinds of corruption happening, and then did I can't remember what they said. There was some kind of like political, international relations explanation for why what the Japanese relationship was to this place and why they decide they're going to start trying to use the Sibyl system. But they're like, oh, Japan looks like they've really got their shit together right now. Let's try and do that, is essentially what it kind of sounded like.
Yeah, the politics of it, like, it was kind of difficult to
got wordy and complicated,
I mean,
and there's a decent amount of exposition.
There's a lot of exposition in this movie. There's a lot of talking. There's a lot of telling and not showing. Like,
they even like developed a device where they would just have somebody who wasn't there be there in like ghost form, or like a manifestation of the person's imagination that they're having a conversation with in their head, but shows them in the room.
Yeah.
It's like, we have so much exposition. We need to make people's thoughts visible so that they can talk to their own thoughts, so that we can continue to have a movie while they're telling us all about the movie.
Well, that also happens in Psycho-Pass 2 a couple times, the season 2. I don't know if it really happens in 1, but yeah, I mean, this is a wordy movie, and they try to. What I really loved about Psycho-Pass 1 is that philosophical debate of like, is this free will? Are you really living in a free society? What would you give up? What freedoms would you give up to live in a quote unquote utopia or whatever? And it's an interesting debate. And the villain of that like brings up some interesting points, and the heroes bring up some other interesting points, and it's like a very gray area. Not one certain thing is right or wrong. It's just like, wow, this is all fucked up. I feel like the movie doesn't really explore those philosophical things as much.
No, I think it partly explores the idea of, if you have doubts about this system and what good it's doing for people, like, let's explore how it could be abused. Or let's see, like, oh, you think, like, there's this fear around what's going on where you're like, oh, I don't like it. And sometimes I'm not quite sure how to express why I don't like it or why I wouldn't want to be in that situation. And then you see it over here and you're like, oh, that's why.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just weird. Like I mean, it doesn't have that philosophy, which is what I love about it. Like, that's what, people love and are drawn to about Death Note. That's like a cat and mouse philosophical battle. Psycho-Pass is a very philosophical show. And like, that's what's great about those series. And after season 1 of Psycho-Pass, they kind of abandoned that philosophical debate, and I think that's also when that Gen Urobuchi guy stopped writing it. So people see that and they're like, "Oh, well, he's not doing it." Like, and I don't know how intense he was in the scripting of this movie either, but this movie I feel like was lacking that, and that's what people really love about the show, and that's what I really liked about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of those things where, with season 1, you're setting up the world, but you are also setting up a lot of the ideas. Mm-hmm. And the villain was very much an ideas man, in a philosophical way that never got, sort of like wankery at any time. It stayed interesting, engaging, and very smart, which can very easily go into a different, like, you're so cool, I bet you wrote, poetry in high school. But I think that after a while, there isn't so much more to say about it, to say about the philosophy. And if you're, taking up screen time to get even wordier to discuss the philosophy of it, you can't explain any of the stuff that's going on.
Well, also, it seems like some of the philosophy that they do bring up in the movie is just a retread of what happened in season 1.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, we already know all this. We already know that the Sibyl system is imperfect, and like, how much freedom are you willing to give up? And it's just like they're retreading that, and they're trying to do it differently. But the way that people just like mess with the Sibyl system, it's like, this is so fucking dumb and corrupt, and like, how would anyone be cool with this at this point?
Yeah.
Like, it's just...
I feel like this movie is kind of like an attempt to put a bow on the series, to kind of wrap it up before moving on away from these characters. kind of like with Serenity and Firefly, that Serenity is this like coming back, revisiting the series and trying in one movie to kind of like wrap up this story that was supposed to go on, for many seasons. And I don't think it successfully wraps things up.
Yeah, that was one of the bigger criticisms of the movie from what I've seen like in the reviews of it. It doesn't like tie that bow nicely.
Yeah.
It just doesn't. Like, I think that if Psycho Pass would have ended with just Psycho Pass season 1, I'm totally fine with that.
Yeah?
I don't think that it needed to be explored anymore.
Interesting.
Like, season 1 ends like in this really fucked up way, but it ends with like the questions. Like, and that's the whole point of the show is like raise these questions. Like, how much freedom are you willing to give up to live in a perfect society? And it ends with none of those questions being answered. And it also kind of leaves it up to you to like figure it out. Like, what do you think? That's what I think is so great about it. And if they keep trying to retread that and like tie a bow on it, like,
I mean, and you don't have to tie a bow on necessarily the plot or the society or thinking about that, but even just a bow on, some character arcs.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that was one of the big criticisms of the movie. I think that you probably read the same stuff that I
I
did.
didn't. I don't think I did. No.
Yeah, that's one of the big criticisms of this movie is that it does not adequately tie a bow on some character arcs. But we've talked about this, the philosophy and all this, the story of this for a while. What did you think of the animation? Before we can move on to spoilers.
I kind of hated the animation at certain points because there's a lot of CGI in this that I don't think is mixed very well. Yeah, CGI in the backgrounds and things compared to sort of like the digital cell drawings, and it didn't. I don't know. There was a lot of hair movement. I noticed they're very careful about hair movement. And some of the walking looks pretty smooth, but there were just times where I started thinking about the animation, and I feel like unless it's because it's so beautiful, if you start thinking about it, or you're watching, you're like, what bothers me about this? That there's something a little bit off about it.
Yeah, I don't know why, but I really liked the animation of it. I know that you were talking about it while we were watching the movie, because I was like, man. I was doing editing on the Demon City Shinjuku videos right before we watched this, and the difference between that like 1980s animation and like the crisp I also was like doing it on a very low res, like downloaded from YouTube version, so it was like 480, maybe like 720p, and then watching this and everything is so crisp and like at least 1080 or 4K or something. Like, it looked worlds better than that, and I was like, oh my god, this is beautiful. I'm blown away. And the hair movement is great. That's one of the first things that I noticed. I was like, it looks so smooth. The walking, like the movement's very good.
I just felt like, like I thought the walking was smooth and the hair movement was smooth, but I felt like it almost looked jittery to me. It was very weird. Like, I think the way that the animation in the foreground moved was different from what was going on in the background movement, and it kept like bumping for me, and it jumped out at me a lot. I hated the way they did like so many reflections in the eyes. I mean, it was just like Akane would look at anything and you could see the full reflection of it in her eyes. And I don't know if they're trying to do that as like some kind of, visual motif. It's supposed to have some philosophical meaning, but it's like her eyes were never actually just like her eye color. And it always made it like rainbow, but you can see a little bit of this computer screen, and it was starting to really bug me.
It's also because like her eyes take up half of her head.
Oh yeah, she has really massive eyes and kind of like drooping eyelids where she always looks a little bit tired or kind of over things.
Yeah, but yeah, I really loved the animation of it. I thought it looked really great. And then they also have a theme song, which is by that band Ling Tosite Segur. I don't know if I'm saying the name right, but I fucking love that band.
What else have they done that you've liked?
They did the Psycho Pass season 1 first theme song called Abnormalize, and I think that they did the season 2 song. Yeah, they definitely did. I forget what it's called. The singer of the band also did one of the themes for, oh, fuck, what's it called? Tokyo Ghoul. So they're like a pretty popular, I think that they're like the Psychopaths band.
They're getting work.
Yeah, they're getting work. They're doing well. And I think that they're just like a successful band in Japan anyway. But yeah, like midway through Psychopath season 1, they get some other band that do it. And some people like that one, but it just doesn't reach the heights that Ling Tosute Segur does for me.
Did they just do the theme song, or did they do the rest of the soundtrack too?
They just did this theme song.
Okay, because I was going to say, I thought the soundtrack was really good.
Yeah, the soundtrack was pretty good for this movie as well.
Yeah.
That's about it for non-spoilers, am I right? Are we good?
You are right.
How amped are you to talk about Psychopaths the movie?
Medium, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like some of the philosophical points are more interesting to talk about, and of course that wasn't the focus of this, but I think that it does a really good job with you know, having a plot that's interesting. It's you know, multi-layered, and it's better than a lot of films based on series that we've seen in the past.
True.
But you know, maybe I'd want to see this as a standalone movie outside of a series with, you know, some different things going on rather than being attached to this series. I don't know. So there's a part of me that's like, well, am I so psyched to talk about this? But yeah, it's not a bad movie.
Yeah. I'm completely on board with everything you just said. I'm completely on board with the
So folks, get ready for a great podcast.
Oh man. All right. Well, let's get into spoilers then.
They wouldn't spoil this, right?
Oh,
They
God,
can't spoil this.
spoilers.
Right?
Don't
spoil
spoil
it. Spoiler talk, anime movie podcast, spoiler talk.
Okay. So I guess the first thing that we can spoil here is this movie marks the return of one of the more heroic characters of season 1, Shinya Kogami, who disappeared after season 1. And he was like the main philosophical driver, and he basically taught Akane Tsunemori everything that she knows and how to think for herself, basically.
Oh, yeah, we didn't really talk about enforcers versus inspectors.
Yeah, that's true.
It's important for Kogami.
Yeah, that is true. Oh, well, there's
Well,
enforcers.
essentially.
There are enforcers who are latent criminals, but the Sibyl system has deemed them adequate enough to help the police find other latent criminals.
Yeah, they're basically like the muscles in situations, and then you have the brains, which are the inspectors. And it's kind of like, you know, let us do the heavy lifting and the kapowing, because if we get kind of cloudy, you know, we're kind of dispensable. But if you do, you've got this important job to keep running. And it reminded me of a series I was watching recently where they kind of like paired up like these brilliant witches with like a swordsman. And that's kind of what's going on with these pairings.
Yeah, they often refer to themselves as hunting dogs. They're dispensable latent criminals, and if they weren't doing this, they'd be in jail or whatever.
Yeah.
So they're like, at least I get some freedom to go out and like do shit. But the interesting thing about Shinya Kogami is he used to be an inspector, and he started to get so obsessive about this one case that he was working on that it clouded his hue and turned him into a latent criminal. And that's actually what happens to one of the enforcers in this movie, Ginoza, who is the person that is also teaching Akane Tsunemori everything that she should be doing as an inspector, but way more by the rule book.
Yeah,
whereas
it's kind of a good cop, bad cop thing going on.
Yeah, but who's the bad cop and who's the good? Like,
who's the bad cop, really?
Yeah, so Ginoza is like by the book, follow the rules. This is how the law should be enforced. And Kogami is kind of the guy that's like, this isn't justice. This isn't how the law should be enforced. Like, do you really think that this is right?
Yeah.
And that's what makes him like such an outstanding character.
And because he's a total badass.
Yeah.
And he can like fight, and you see some really cool fight scenes, but he's also like intellectual and is kind of questioning these things.
Yeah, and he also, the other interesting thing is he used to be partners with Ginoza. And so Ginoza and he have like this interesting relationship of like, you betrayed me basically. And like, I can't believe that you became a latent criminal, and like, you should have kept doing things by the book like me. And then eventually Ginoza's dad gets killed, and then that makes him a latent criminal. And so it's like, there's all these really interesting and fun relationships.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like a competitive brothers
Yeah, exactly.
kind of relationship where it's the like let me punch him in the face, but no, you can't do that.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, me, I can do that. And Akane has a pretty interesting relationship with Kogami because it's a very platonic relationship, which is kind of nice to see in things that it's not written to have this massive sexual tension. It doesn't really like lead to a relationship. I think just because of heteronormativity, you are watching it with that in mind. Like, it's probably going to go there.
Yeah, you're trying to ship them.
Yeah, and it doesn't, which is kind of cool.
That's one of the things that's like very highly praised about the series and this movie. Is like, they just have a good working relationship of like debating things and like, do you think this is right? Because I don't, and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, because she's totally capable of critical thinking, but she's very much on board with the system and believes in it, but kind of open to hearing other sides about it.
See, I don't think that she's down for the Sibyl system. I think that she realizes that it's necessary right now. And if like you just took it away, or if people actually found out what it really is, which is a bunch of brains and jars of the criminally asymptomatic
Well, this is her whole character arc is going from being very on board with it, being top of her class, and like, I want to be really good at my job and I want to be an inspector and I believe in this, to seeing what is actually going on and starting to question it. And that's partly because of her relationship with Kogami, which is what makes Kogami such a great part of the series. And then he disappears. And anyway, but yeah, let's talk about brains in jars.
Yeah. So basically what the Sibyl system is, there is a certain population in the psychopath world called the criminally asymptomatic. And these people cannot be read by the Sibyl system. So you can point a dominator at them. They just do not register. And that is the villain of season 1. I forget his name. I was just about to say Makashi. All right, his name is Shogo Makishima.
Okay.
That's what his name is. And he is a criminally asymptomatic person, and he's basically taunting the Sibyl system and being like, I can live outside of your world and I can basically do anything that I want. And the dominators and the Sibyl system can't do anything to me, so I could just go ahead and murder people. He even like murders Akane Tsunemori's like one of her good friends in front of her as she's like pointing a dominator. She's like, why won't this like scan him? Like, what the fuck is going on here? He slits this girl's throat right in front of her, and then it kind of rattles Akane to be like, oh my God, the Sibyl system isn't perfect. This isn't a utopia. So basically those people's brains are what make up the Sibyl system. And I don't really remember why. I don't know if it's because they're like super intelligent people, if they're super special or whatever.
I think it's suggesting that they're somehow unbiased. But I mean, they basically have decided that it's murder statistics. You know, so they murder these people essentially by taking their brain away from their body and adding it to this network, this matrix of jars of brains, and they hook it up into the system. And it's kind of like an averaging out of how each of those brains feels ethically, morally about this person and these actions, and they're able to tell. And I don't know if there's also some level of like psychic ability, because if they're able to scan it and get information, it could just be technology as magic as well.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, like I was really digging Psychopaths, and then when they revealed that to be what the Sibyl system is, I was like, what the hell is going on? Like, what the fuck is that? Like, that makes absolutely, like, that's the part that I was kind of like, this is dumb. But everything up to that and aside from that is super interesting and awesome.
And the Sibyl system, for some reason, is really interested in Akane.
Yes.
via, and isn't the sort of, what is the bureau called?
MWPSB and the CID. Like they have so many acronyms in this
But
fucking show.
it's like the Person Safety Bureau
Yeah.
or something, and there is a that is kind of the umbrella over all of the inspectors and the enforcers, and it's what Akane works for and Kogami, and there's a leader who's like an older woman, an older lady, and she turns out to be a cyborg. Is that
Yes.
it? She's a cyborg.
She's a cyborg that
controlled by the Sibyl system.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And like different brains can take control of her
at different
times. We see that in season 2. But yeah, and I think that part of the reason why it's interested in Akane Tsunemori is because she's notable because her hue never gets cloudy.
Yeah.
It's always the same, but it's not criminally asymptomatic. She just has like the most level head of anyone in Japan, apparently, or whatever.
Must be nice.
Yeah, I know, right? So that's the spoilery world of Psycho-Pass at this point.
I mean, and I wish I could remember the lady's name or the name of this bureau, but this idea of having a cyborg that's controlled by the Sibyl system becomes a very important point because we have that happening also in the film version.
Yes. So the president, I don't know what they call his title is in the movie, but Han, who is kind of like a dictator of the Southeast Asian Union kind of alliance that they've got going on. He's the person that's kind of decided to implement the Sibyl system into the Shambhala float, I believe it's called. And they're testing it out. That's his kind of passion project, but it also turns out that he is a cyborg slave conduit to the Sibyl system.
Yeah, so there's a few things that draw Akane's attention to this area. And it's firstly that Shion, who's the absurdly sexy CSI lady.
Oh my God.
there's always somebody in a CSI series that you go to that is like the computer person, and they do analysis, and they'll turn their swivel chair around and be like, "Well, let me tell you what this sample says."
Yeah.
And she's just absurdly hot. Just always a ton of cleavage. And red lips
in a big old lesbo relationship with one of the enforcers.
That's right. Yeah, and she's got blonde hair, and she's like, there are these things that keep popping up that are concerning me, but she's not supposed to say anything about it. She feels like her hands are tied, but she feels like she can tell Akane about it. And they also have some people who had smuggled their way into Japan. And they were like, how did this happen? We're super isolated and nobody gets in, nobody gets out. And they are going through the memories of one of these guys who had been caught. And she sees Kogami. And so now she's like, I need to research the funny business that's going on over in the Southeast Asian Union. And also, I have a bone to pick with Kogami, which is, why did you leave me? Where are you?
Yeah, I need to arrest you.
Yeah, but really,
yeah,
she just wants to hang out with him.
She wants to hang out with him.
Yeah.
He's a cool dude.
Yeah.
She wants to smoke cigarettes with him. Well, smell him smoking cigarettes.
Yeah, she misses him so much that she just lets cigarettes burn because it reminds her of the smell of him.
Yeah, and like all throughout season 2, you were talking about how people have this monologue with another character in their head that's not even really there, and that happens in this movie, but it happens in season 2 a lot.
But it's mostly with Kogami, right?
Yeah, it's her talking with Kogami in her head of like, what would Kogami think?
Yeah.
And she starts to put on her Kogami hat or whatever.
Yeah, because they had such a cool relationship that they never should have broken up for a season.
Yeah.
Which they tried to like have their cake and eat it too in that situation, because they're like, well, for the drama of it, we want Kogami to go away. But also, he's such a great character. We can't totally lose him. So, thought people.
So, yeah, they're trying to implement the Sibyl system into this Shambhala float. And Akane is going over there for the purposes that Kat just mentioned. Go see Kogami, and she's worried about what's going on, and like now people are infiltrating Japan. So she goes over there, and we're introduced to Nicholas Wong, who is charged with like kind of being her guest relations person, show her the ropes of everything that's going on. And right away, you already get like I don't like this guy vibe from him.
He's too pretty.
Yeah.
You know, he's too pretty.
He has like a weird cross braid middle part thing and then a ponytail.
There was this thing that happened in about 1998 where all these girls were like, you know what's really cool is doing like a crisscross part. So you take like a pen or something and you draw this crisscross, and then you'd have like a perfect crisscross going down your head. But you could also do it in this way and then brush it forward, and it almost looked like braiding. And that's basically what this guy had. And it was so weird to see because I was like, am I about to see some Sanrio pencil cases too? Like this is a blast from the past.
Some Lisa Frank folders.
Yeah.
Did you ever do the crisscross?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Did you ever do the ponytail that was dangling by an inch away from the bottom of your long hair?
No, yeah. So he's got that crisscross going on, and then he's got the long hair, and it's just like he's got a band around just the last like 6 inches of his very long hair.
I would say like the last 3 inches. Like it's such
I'd
a
say like
small
the
amount
length of my hand compared to your body. You've got like hair down to your butt, and then.
Yeah, I mean, it's long hair, and
Yeah.
he's got very little of it tied off. Like, why are you even bothering, you know?
Yeah.
So he's immediately suspicious because he's driving around and showing Akane, like, the state of things in the Southeast Asian Union. And he's basically like, this is how we deal with the latent criminals. And he shows her the collars with the tranquilizers if the hue gets too cloudy, and then the poison if it gets way too cloudy, because they don't have dominators there. And he's basically like, yeah, you know, the Sibyl system is gonna be really great for us here. And she's like pointing out all this like bad stuff that's going on. He's like, well, it's just how it is out here. We're not fancy like Japan.
Yeah, and he's kind of like, you know, you can't let that bother you.
Yeah.
And I think that this is definitely the movie telling us that this guy is no good.
Yeah.
And because they're testing the Sibyl system out in this, sort of secluded area. There are people who are kind of like storming at the gates who like want to get in because they think it's some kind of like a sanctuary or that they might be saved by this. And then you also have like mercenaries and guerrillas who are, trying to kind of continue a civil war, or it's this kind of like underdog against the sort of authoritarian violent dictatorship.
Yeah. And Nicholas Wong is the colonel of this military, and it's a very military state. Like the military control stuff, are really in charge of decisions. He has a close personal relationship with Han, who is the, I guess, president. We'll just call him president.
Lead dictator.
Yeah.
Head dictator guy.
Yeah, according to Kogami. But he has a close relationship with that guy, and it's like his mouth is close to his ear, and Han's listening. You know what I mean?
But at some point, they kind of end up sounding like they have like divergent plans.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually we find out that Han has actually been replaced.
Yep. Han has been replaced by a robot that is now a conduit of the Sibyl system.
Layers and layers and layers. I do appreciate that about this movie. That, I mean, this whole military state, 100 years into the future, but, the sort of union of countries, like the dissolution of certain borders and the attempt to become part of a union, and then a military state with this idea of this class structure that's not working out well, and guerrilla warfare. Like all of this is like totally plausible.
Yeah, and I also think this is gonna sound kind of fucking crazy, but I think that the Sibyl system, we're not too far away from something like that actually existing.
Is it Conspiracy Joe time?
I mean, I think that in China they already have like that social score thing where it's kind of like a Black Mirror episode there, where if you don't have a good social score or whatever, you're barred from certain jobs and you can't get to certain places. And
So like a personality test?
I don't know exactly all of the details of it, but like we're not that far from having a Sibyl system running in 100 years, dude. We already have a bunch of stuff like on our phones that track our health, track our finances. We have like mental health apps in here.
I almost feel like the thing that kind of protects us from something that is this cohesive is free market capitalism. Weirdly, weirdly, free market capitalism makes it more difficult to have complete monopolies over things. And I know that Jeff Bezos exists, but basically, like, because there's this like vie for economic power and political power. This country is super divided, much more divided than many smaller countries are. That even if we did kind of get towards a place like this or have the technology to do it, I think that there'd be so much infighting about it. It would be really hard to put it into place ever at like that widespread.
Well, I think so. You think that the reason why it would never happen is because of capitalism. I think, and this is a radically different idea, I think a reason why it wouldn't happen is because of fucking hillbilly rednecks that are like, I fucking love freedom. Those people would never allow that. They would not want that to happen. But there are people, at least that I know, that are like, yeah, fuck freedom of speech. Like, you should be censoring yourself. And like, that's a scary thing in my mind, because that's the first step of like, well, you can't say
First
this.
step to the Sibyl system, the slippery slope.
Exactly. Like, I mean, that is a step of like, yeah, you shouldn't be saying that. And like, if you do say that, you should lose your job or you should do this and blah, blah, blah. And like, there are people that, athletes, it always happens. They get drafted by a team and then everybody goes through their Twitter and then they find out that like they said the N-word or something when they were 16 or something. And then
Right.
they come under fire, or people have lost jobs because of like kind of off-color jokes that they've made on Twitter or something. So that is kind of I guess like social score, Sibyl system test run in my mind already existing. And then that's why people are, the excuse of it is like
socially enforced. Like, imagine trying to make that like a functional government based, hugely funded. Like, imagine trying to get the funding.
But I think that people would be down with that because they are already socially enforcing it. So if they were like, I don't need to do this anymore, somebody else will take care of it. Sure, that'd be great.
Yes, I don't think that's the way socially enforced things work, because I think that social enforcement is just part of culture, and it's part of shaming and ostracizing and the little things that people do on a moral and an ethical level to try to do minor social Darwinism, on like a really soft level, and institutionalizing that can take a long time.
Yeah, I mean, it
there's
would
certain
absolutely
policy
take a long
that can
time.
kind of come into place about certain behavior that is and isn't acceptable. But yeah, I just don't like imagine the taxes that would have to go into make like we're already suffering with like such a small amount of money going into a lot of these public funded things. Like, who knows where it goes, because it's like trillions and trillions of dollars. I don't have any understanding of how this financially works in our
to the
country.
Sibyl system.
Yeah, they're just saving up. Yeah, that's the theory. They're saving up in the background for the Sibyl system, and that's why schools have too many kids in classrooms.
I'm just saying I could totally see it happening because I already see people socially doing it. And if they had a system of somebody that's like, yeah, we have this database of like, if you, let's just say this example, because so many people have fallen victim to it, tweeting the N-word. It's crazy how many people have fallen victim to this. It's like, bro, if you have any level of fame and you think that you may have done that, delete your Twitter, all right? I think people, if someone came out tomorrow and was like, hey, I've developed this technology that can go through every single person's Twitter, and anyone that has tweeted the N-word, it'll come out, and then they'll like lose their job or something. I think people would be like, great, totally do that. So I don't have to do the searching anymore. We have this system that can just like on this tiny, just one word scale, find out who all has done this.
I just think, like that's suggesting that there'd be this massive social contract where everyone would be okay with that sort of thing. And I think we've seen that people are pretty annoyed and perturbed by things like any kind of targeted marketing or anything that suggests that there is some kind of, somebody listening on your phones, any kind of surveillance. I mean, I think what you have to think about is what is the intention? Is like the person developing that technology probably wants to get money for that. And it's more likely that it would be used for marketing, to make money before it would be to institutionalize any kind of, behavior that should be normalized or any type of criminal situation. I just think that, I have a hard time believing that it could be set up. I think it could be set up somewhere like Korea, where the country's like 98% or 99% homogenous, and it's fairly like small. I think that it's easier for somewhere like that to have a dictatorship, kind of start. I think that this country is just so big, and there's so many people who are off grid. There are people who live in, like in the middle of Alaska, completely off grid. It's just hard to imagine this ever working on such a large level. Like you could kind of institutionalize things like that in specific cities, but then there's just so many places in between where you'd have to fall off the radar immediately.
Well, I know that you just brought up about like there are a bunch of things that are surveillance, and if you talk about, hey, I would like to get some pizza rolls, like there's a chance that you'd see pizza rolls advertised on your phone scrolling through Instagram the next time that you're on there. And you're saying that like people don't like that and it's weird and it weirds people out, but we all still have our phones. Yeah. We all still don't care.
But again, it's being used for marketing to make money off of you.
Yeah, but I don't think that it's too far of a leap to think that people would be like, yeah, I'd let this determine law. I don't think that's too far of a leap because, even when there was like that controversy of the government like spying on our phone conversations, like the Patriot Act or whatever, there was a large population of people like, yeah, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, what do you have to worry about? There is a large population of people that think like that. I
wish I could live long enough to be like, see, Joe, I was right. but like,
I wish I could live long enough to show you, hey, look, this is the fucking Sibyl system, Kat.
we have talked about this in the past that I have not a lot of interest in what happens after I'm gone. I don't think it's any of my business. But but there's a part of me now it's like, well, now I need to know.
See, isn't it interesting? And you know what's interesting is this debate that we've just been having for the last 10, 15 minutes or so is so much more interesting than this entire movie.
That we've completely moved away from talking about.
It is, but that's the thing about the movie is like the series opened the can of worms to offer like, hey, what is this? And the movie doesn't explore these themes as well as the series did. And it's just like, there isn't any new material to go off of. So they start to do things where it's like, oh, well, people are just going to fuck with the Sibyl system and make it fake.
And I think that's interesting. I think you need to explore that because it's been so isolated and focused on Japan that I'm asking throughout the entire season 2, like what is happening with the rest of the world? Like I want to see it. Can this be implemented somewhere else? And I think that they are answering some kind of practical questions rather than some philosophical questions in this film. This film has so many characters. It really is about how this power can be abused, and it takes away the gray area that we have with the series about how some people are protected, and And it is this sort of Shangri-La, weirdly. But we see the abuse here, and it's really interesting to not have the dominators, because the dominators are such a huge part of this plot. With season 1, with the asymptomatic, is that what they call them?
Yeah, criminally asymptomatic.
That gun can lock up in a situation like Akane watching her best friend's throat get slit, and then she's powerless and can't use it against this guy. And so it fucks with the system. And then in this, situation where you're in the Southeast Asian Union, they're not using dominators, which means that nothing is controlling who or what they can shoot. So they're already kind of outside of that. And on top of that, they're just doing it within this like certain place and ignoring the rest of the population. And of course, we find out later that everybody in the military has these horrifically clouded hues according to the Sibyl system.
Yeah, and they've somehow fucked with the Sibyl system or the hue checkers to disregard that, and everyone in the military is like this murderous psychopath. So that's what, after the philosophy of it goes away, then it's more about just like, how can we fuck with the Sibyl system and show that it's corrupt and it can't be controlled. Like in season 2, they have people, or even I actually think it's in season 1, they have people with masks that can make them unscannable.
Right. Yeah.
And then this place is like, they just fucked with the entire system and calibrated it to show that these military people aren't latent criminals. And it's just like, if the Sibyl system is that easily messed with, and it doesn't seem like the Sibyl system cares, because at the end of the movie, there's this whole speech of like, well, it's still the best thing in the world, and it's still the best society or whatever. Look outside, because look at every other society right now.
The Sibyl system did it on purpose. It was like a science experiment or something to see how it would work somewhere, but they wanted to. That part got a little bit complicated.
Yeah, and
convoluted.
It's so wordy.
Yeah, I mean, and then you also get, you get Han calling in these mercenaries to try and kill Kogami, and it's this kind of. It reminds me a little bit of Ninja Scroll, where you just get like all of the ninjas coming in with their different powers and their whatevers, and they're all assassins, and they're just trying to get to Kogami. And I can't remember why the Sibyl system, I guess, must have wanted him to be dead.
Well, because he
got out?
No, because Kogami saw that the Sibyl system was being implemented in the Southeast Asian Union. And he started to like train the guerrilla people that didn't want the Sibyl system, or there was some kind of civil war against Han, and he was training all of the guerrilla warfare people. So he was like public enemy number 1 to the Sibyl system. And, he was public enemy number 1 back in season 1 after he decided to kill Shogo Makishima, because he decided to take the law into his own hands, basically, and he shot him with like a revolver.
Right, because the Dominators didn't work on him.
Exactly, and he was like, no, this guy, I think he also like killed his old partner before Ginoza. And because the Sibyl system couldn't scan him, he was like, well, then we can't bring this guy to justice.
Yeah.
And people were like, well, you just have to be okay with it because that's what the Sibyl system said. And he's like, no, the Sibyl system's wrong.
So it's cool with this movie showing that he's going off and doing something with his time and fighting for his beliefs and his sense of justice. But at the end of this film, they're kind of like, yeah, you need to go, and he's like, okay, I can't stay here, but I'll find something else to do, which is kind of how you leave something open if you want to find, kind of catch up with that character later and have another kind of story.
Yeah.
With them. But I know that there are other movies, there's sequels, and I know you mentioned OVAs, but I don't know if they are spin-offs or if there is a sequel that Kogami comes back in.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Kogami makes another appearance in the Psychopaths universe, because this has kind of been the extent of my Psychopaths toe dipping. Like, I watched the
Yeah.
first season, loved it. Second season, I was like, this is kind of bullshit. And then this movie, which I just find like it was just there were some scenes where people were explaining things and there's not even a flashback of them showing like what they're talking about, or
Yeah.
it was just so wordy. And I remember while we were watching it, there was one particular like scene where Akane's asking Shion for something, and she just used all of these words that mean absolutely. She was like, "We need to get a semantic scan from the pill bugs scanners, and we need to read
CSI.
we need to read the hues of the psychopaths, and if they're criminally asymptomatic." And I was like, "This is so much fucking jargon that you all just made up in these two sentences, and it makes no fucking sense."
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we also get this kind of like Deus Ex Machina end to
Yeah.
a certain extent. I mean, they maybe kind of a little bit build up to it, but not really at all. We get the mercenaries who do end up getting the upper hand on Kogami, and they are collecting him for Han so he can be executed. And we have Akane who happened to have this little box from Shion that's like open in case things get a little hairy. And I was like, you should give a little more information.
Yeah.
Like, what counts as, you get into a situation, you're like, oh, maybe this is now. And you open, you're like, no, this isn't now. That's
Yeah.
not the right time for this. Who knows what's in that box?
It's just a cigarette from Shion. She's like, "Well, fuck now."
It's a cigar.
Yeah.
Just have your last one on me.
Yeah.
A tiny flask.
Yeah.
You're fucked.
I mean,
Sorry.
she is like a smoking, like drinking lady.
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't put it past her to just give her like a little flask.
That'd be really
and then like Akane's looking like, fuck.
Shit. Yeah. It doesn't help me. But it's these like tiny spider robots who are going to go off and like collect information. And that information gets back to Shion, and they just like get this whole army together, and all the enforcers and all the inspectors like show up on the rooftop just in time to make sure that Akane and Kogami, don't get killed.
Yeah.
And there's some cool fight scenes,
Yeah, I was gonna say, what would your favorite scene of this movie be, you think?
I'm not sure.
This is a hard one, like, because the only, like, you can't, like, some of the wordiness of the other scenes and the explanations that they're giving, it doesn't make it a very compelling thing. And there, like you said, there are some cool fight scenes, and those are just, I feel like those would be the go-to, oh, that's my favorite scene. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because what am I going to be like? Oh yeah, the scene where Kogami's explaining to Akane how they got into the Civil War situation, where he's just walking down the hall of this temple. Like, that's no one's favorite scene.
I do think that, Kane has this kind of handmaiden who's one of these latent criminals in the, what did you call it? The Shambhala float.
Shambhala float, yeah.
And she's got one of the collars, and she's just trying to smile all the time and being like, no, this is great. This is so much better than everything. I'm so happy.
Yeah.
And Akane, kind of comes up with this plan to save her, which I don't know if it's totally motivated that they got so close, that it would warrant saving her. But once she's kind of like honed in with Shion, she has the technology to remove the tracking device, or the killing device, the collar. And she takes this, like, she's like, be free. And, then drinks the glass of water and is like, wait, oh God. Like, obviously has
poison.
been drugged. And then, Nicholas Wong comes in, and he's like, yes, you've done what I've told you to do. And she's like, yeah, so you're going to like let my brother go, right? And it was like, we could have gotten this backstory earlier so that we could have like empathized with her a bit more. But then he's like, fuck you, bam. And just like, point blank shoots her in the face. And I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I saw it, I was just like, oh, God damn.
Yeah. Yeah, that was pretty brutal, because Akane is also just like kind of powerless on the ground because she's been drugged. And, you see the haziness, and you see her point of view of everything. And the maid lady is just like, all right, you can let my brother go, right? You're going to let him go? And Wong is like, nah. Or he says something like, you should learn to not be so trusting. And it's just
Yeah.
like, bam, right in the fucking face.
That's a great moment of characterization for him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the most interesting scenes where it has some twists, and we've just kind of had her connect with Shion, and she's also like pretending to take a shower, and so it's like some fun spy stuff, and it feels kind of James Bond feels kind of like it becomes like an adventure movie for a hot second.
Yeah. I have to say that Kogumi's fight scenes after a while, they're just unreal and unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, he gets so injured at some point. I'm just like, how is he walking?
Yeah, I mean, after Han's mercenaries capture him, they have him chained up, and they just show these mercenaries just wailing on him, just punching him for what seems like minutes, and he's chained up. He's all battered and bruised and beaten. And then Desmond, the guy, he's got like a cyborg arm and a cyborg leg. He unchains him for some reason. And he's like, I'm just going to make this a bit more of a fair fight. And he's just beating the shit out of Kogami. And
Kogumi's already half dead.
yeah. And he's barely able to stand. And then out of nowhere, he's able to stand, and he tries to throw a punch. And then Desmond just wails on him some more. And then something happens where Kogami escapes and Desmond's chasing him. Number one, how can Kogami run or walk? Like, he should be in a wheelchair. Like, that dude is fucked up.
I mean, there's a weird moment where Desmond's kind of like, why? I just want to kill this guy. Like, why can't I? Like, we haven't had word to kill him yet. And is holding a gun above him and then like pouring a bottle of alcohol down the gun on him. And I was like, is this some kind of waterboarding?
Yeah, that's what I was like. What the hell is this? But I think
he escapes once he gets the call. That's kind of like, all right, it's time. And he's like, all right, I guess I don't get to kill him now. We're gonna take him up to the rooftop for this end scene. But he escapes from that, and that's where Desmond starts to chase him.
Okay. Well, the scene where the gun and the alcohol, Desmond's actually trying to recruit him to be a mercenary.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But yeah,
Well, that's what I do whenever I try to recruit somebody for any activity.
I point a gun at them and then give them a shot on top of the gun. But yeah, then Kogami escapes because that's when all of the inspectors arrive in the helicopter, right? So then Desmond's chasing him, but he's still fucked up. He's still
so fucked up. But like, he looks like he's had like 6 to 7 months of healing between being. Maybe it's that alcohol. Maybe that's the you just pour a bottle of rum over you, and you're basically Wolverine now. He's like a little fucked up, but like one black eye, not like the 12 broken ribs that he should definitely have in the front and back of his body, the broken pelvis, and definitely one of the legs is broken. Like the number of broken bones is intense.
Well, I mean, before that chained up scene, he's getting beat up by the lady assassin and Desmond at the same time. And then who knows what they were doing in between then and the chaining up, because they were probably beating the shit out of him. And then they're beating him up when he's chained up. Desmond's beating him up. Then he pours alcohol on him. Then they're like, all right, well, we're going to go to the rooftop. Then he has to run to escape. And I guess, adrenaline's taking over or whatever. But then Desmond catches up to him, and then he just beats the shit out of him some more. It's insane.
And then somehow Kogami gets the upper hand and like tears one of his limbs off. And I was like, wasn't that metal?
Yeah.
What is happening anymore?
Yeah, he tears it off, and then Ginoza shows up to save the day and kind of saves Kogami. And then while Kogami's like, oh, thank God that you got here, Ginoza punches him to pay off that joke that was in the beginning of the movie where it's like, if you see Kogami Akane, punch him for me.
And she's like, you can do it yourself when you see him.
Yeah.
So just to pay off for that.
Yeah, so Kogami's like, you're not going to arrest me. And then Gino's like, this is some actual character development for him, because he now realizes the Sibyl system's fucked up. And he's like, you know what? Maybe you were right about some stuff, Kogami. So
he's also like, I owe you one because you just saved me.
Exactly. So he punches Kogami, and he's like, what, you're not going to arrest me? He's like, no, that's good enough for me. And then he walks away.
Yeah, and I feel like there's this big thing in anime that comes up a lot of desperately not wanting to be in someone's debt.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like that's a super common theme, and maybe it's in like American culture, but it's kind of like this honor thing. And that's kind of what's happening, where he's like, I can't arrest you and be in your debt for say, so I'm going to immediately give this back to you by letting you go, and now I'm not in your debt.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it. What I wanted to ask you is, what philosophy do you think they could have explored in this film if they were going to go down the route of looking into more philosophy?
See, I was trying to think of that when we were talking about how like this movie doesn't explore the philosophy, and that's why I said like I think if they had just ended it at Psycho-Pass the series, it would have been fine, and it leaves the question in the user's hands. But I don't know how much more philosophy you could ask involving the Sibyl system, you know? I mean, Minority Report did something similar where it's like that movie also had like precognitive people that could predict the future and see if someone's about to commit a crime. That's when like these future cops showed up and arrest somebody. But that doesn't give you the option of like, maybe you can change your future. Psycho-Pass, the Sibyl system doesn't give you the option of maybe you can change your hue, which is what happens in episode 1, because one girl who was actually like a victim of like a sexual assault type of deal, because she's been exposed to such crime, it can also affect your hue.
She's just been immediately incredibly traumatized.
Exactly. And that clouds a hue. And then if you point a dominator at her, it was like, oh, she's to be executed because she's a latent criminal. In
a horrific, violent way. We didn't talk about that.
Yeah.
We don't have to, but the dominator does some horrific things to the human body. It's just total body horror.
Yeah.
The way it kills people.
Insane. I don't know what is in those bullets, but craziness.
Yeah.
But Akane sees this happen in episode 1, and she's like, wait, maybe her hue can change. Like, let's wait a second. Like, let's see if the Dominator will go from execution to just like paralyze her or whatever. And this like ruffles the feathers of all the enforcers, and the inspectors are like, no, this is how the Sibyl system works.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great exploration of the philosophy of it. But I don't know what beyond that you can explore, which is why I think that people were so disappointed by season 2. And I think why people had some problems with the movie. And it's kind of my problem with the movie. I don't know what else could be explored with. I mean, I was thinking about how you could make a rom-com situation.
What?
So in the movie, they talk about how Akane's friend has been set up by the Sibyl system with her husband. And she's like, of course, if the Sibyl system could give me the perfect job, of course it can give me the perfect man. I could see a rom-com of like the Sibyl system where it's like, oh no, this is your perfect man. And then the girl is like, I don't really like that guy. I like this guy.
Imagine if that was the B story.
Yeah.
You just cut back from the Southeast Asian Union to check in on the relationship of this woman.
Yeah. But you know what I'm saying? It's like that could be an exploration of this world.
And they did kind of, by introducing that idea in the movie, they did kind of dip their toe into the philosophy of, you know, how would this affect relationships and how people relate to each other.
Yeah, or even like a job thing. Like you could say that you're perfect for X job, but maybe...
Well, that is explored in the series, though.
Yeah. Well, it's also explored in the series because Akane is approved for all jobs. So she has her pick of the litter. She can be anything that she wants to be. And then the one girl is like, oh, I wish I could do whatever job I wanted. So maybe there's like an exploration of that. And like, is it really the job that you want? Because if you're doing a job that you don't really care about or love, you're not going to want to show up to work. And then you'll be a fucking bad employee.
Now,
so that's where I think that you could explore the philosophy of this. But it doesn't involve the MWPSB or the inspectors and enforcers. It would have to be a completely different section of the Sibyl system world where it could be like you'd have to explore personal romantic relationships or like the labor force.
Yeah. For me, there's actually something that came up for me while I was watching the series that was never explored.
Okay.
And I think that especially with taking it outside of Japan, it would have been the perfect opportunity to explore the social and cultural differences between places. Because one thing that was really strange to me is that, if you are somewhere that has a fairly unified moral or ethical code, that whatever is moral and ethical in one place can be extremely different in another culture.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what was super fascinating to me that they never talked about, because this idea of these brains, these are Japanese brains that have a different idea of what counts as ethical or moral, even when averaged out. And if you took the averaging out of moral and ethical codes of all Americans, it would probably look very different.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just culturally, Japan and America are very different.
So basically, the idea with the Sibyl system, having to find these criminally asymptomatic brains within Japan, if you went to another country, you'd have to go and find the criminally asymptomatic brains of that country. And then there's some interesting ideas of like, if somebody's criminally asymptomatic, but they were born in this country, but they've lived in this country for 30 years, like, do they still count as being in touch with the moral and ethical code of that country? And so like, that's what I wanted to see more of, this like, sort of cultural theory about what we think is wrong and bad and where you cross the lines, and how that can be so different country to country.
Yeah, I think that with Psychopaths, it kind of relies on the, like, we all have the same moral compass, basically, but that's not true. Like,
Not at all.
Not at all. Like,
I mean, you can see it just with what's allowed on television in different countries. The certain words that people are allowed to say in some countries and aren't in others, levels of nudity or how sexually explicit it can be. And I think that's a really good gauge of where the sort of general ethical and moral stances are, is with censorship in television and movies.
Yeah.
And rating systems that tells you, you need to be of a certain age to see this because you've already developed a moral and ethical compass that this won't influence you in a certain way. And we think that this is influential and this isn't,
Yeah. And I mean, even within America, state by state, there are different laws.
Oh, yeah.
So if the Sibyl system was implemented here, like, we have federal laws, but there are a lot of different laws in different states. Like, it'd be wild to explore that kind of stuff. But I think if we do it like we have it in America, like with all 50 states, different laws going on,
I mean,
that's a nightmare.
I mean, it is the way our country works anyway, which is a little bit of a nightmare. And would you have a different Sibyl system for Northern California versus Southern California?
Yeah.
Would it be different between like Santa Barbara and, Los Angeles?
Maybe you're right. Maybe the Sibyl system won't happen. It's way too complicated.
Not gonna lie, I'm a little satisfied about that.
But you saw where I'm coming from with that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, for sure.
Oh God, I feel like we should say this, that we've actually seen this movie twice.
Yeah.
And as we started watching it the second time for this podcast, Kat was like, "Are you sure that we watched this before?"
Unconvinced.
I don't remember anything about.
Totally unconvinced.
And I think that speaks to the goodness of the movie.
Yeah, and here's the thing: is I started to remember when Nicholas Wong showed up, because I remembered his crisscross part and his outfit and his terrible moral compass, things like that. And I had these visions. I could remember Kogami in an empty building, and then this like Star Wars style spider robot thing, and those really jogged my memory. It's like, I have seen this before, but the whole setup for that movie was very, very forgettable, especially because we never kind of go back to talking about the guys who had, I guess we do really briefly in like a very brief scene, but it would have been great to have more of a tie-in to the initial events that kicked this off.
Yeah, the initial scene of the movie is these guys that have infiltrated Japan, and they're like doing some kind of terrorism stuff. And then it kind of goes unreferenced for so long, and then when it does, Kogami's like, "Oh yeah, I know those guys."
Yeah, and then it's
Like we didn't like those
yeah,
guys.
it just moves on.
Anyway, there's a much bigger problem than those guys going on. You know, like this guy Han and this guy Wong. Like that shit's whatever. Yeah, okay. Those. Yeah, I kind of briefly know those guys, but we don't like them.
Yeah, so I think that it might say something about the movie for sure. I also think it says something about the time in which we watched it, because it was before the AMP existed.
Yeah.
And I feel like now any anime movie I'm watching, like I am watching critically, and I'm watching closely to remember it. And it would have been pretty early in the pandemic,
Yeah.
which was a weird, foggy time, and also a time when we were consuming so much media.
Oh yeah.
Because there wasn't anything to do, so you ended up like binging all these series, watching all these movies, so things kind of blend together. Like parts of this I was watching, I was like, oh, I thought this was part of season 2. You know,
Yeah.
like there were all these things in my head where I had just completely muddled all of it together.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I think it also kind of speaks to the nature of the movie and how unmemorable it is, because I also, even watching it the second time, watching it critically, because it's like we're going to do a podcast about it, there are some parts of the movie where I'm just like, it's hard to pay attention to. At a certain point, you and I both started like texting people or like looking something else up. And it's just not very interesting, especially those long scenes where people are just doing these long expository monologues. And it's just not very interesting to watch. It has great characters, and like it is kind of like fan servicey stuff where it's like, oh, the return of Kogami. We love Kogami. He was like the best
And
character.
Akane constantly taking her clothes off for some reason.
Yeah. But it's just not memorable to the point, because I even had a hard time remembering the plot of it when you were like, are you sure we watched this? I was like, yeah, I think that they go to a place that doesn't have the Sibyl system and they're trying to implement it. Maybe, I think so. I remembered like kind of specific scenes, but if before we had watched this again for the podcast, if you were like, hey, what's the Psycho-Pass movie about? It would have been, I think it's about them going to implement the Sibyl system somewhere where it wasn't, but I don't remember how Kogami is involved, but I know he's in it.
That's like about the information you'd have if you just read about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that speaks to how good the movie is.
I feel like this is leading to an AMP number. I feel like you've just explained your AMP number.
Yeah. All right, I'll go first. I'll crank my amp. I'll crank it to 5 out of 11.
Okay. Less than half.
Yeah. I mean, it's just not very interesting. And the story, it's just not very interesting. It's not memorable. The animation I really liked. I enjoyed it. I also don't really like Akane. Like,
Yeah,
I think that she's
I get it.
kind of annoying. She's a wet blanket. Her voice is annoying. And this is an Akane story. Like, there's, in Psycho-Pass, they explore the backstories of the side characters a lot more.
Yeah.
They play a much more integral part. They have their own episodes and everything. This is very much an Akane story and a Kogami story, and like them solving this case together about the Sibyl system. And I just don't really like her. She's like a goody two shoes, but also
Well, she's like purposefully monotone.
Yeah.
And I think they're trying to make that, part of her personality to make it seem like, oh yeah, her hue really is never clouded because she never kind of gets to an emotional place, which is hard to have a really relatable main character who doesn't experience a lot of ups and downs. It's like, that's what makes characters,
Yeah, and I like the side characters in Psycho-Pass. Like, I liked the jokey guy. He was fun. I liked Shion and hearing her story. I mean, the punk rock girl, that episode in the series, like, it was out of nowhere. It doesn't really affect anything. But you don't really get those relationships in this movie as much as you do in the series. I just think that it's so inferior to the first season. Second season has a lot of problems. I recommend that guy's 3-hour video. If you, it's so entertaining. He just goes off on it. But yeah, the long expository dialogue, the plot that just isn't interesting. It doesn't have the philosophical debates that the original series has. Like, it's just, meh.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm going to go with a 6.5 out of 11. Because I'm impressed with any movie based on a series that really is a movie. Like it pulls it together. It comes up with a new plot. I think there's some things that are clever about what they did. And yeah, I think it failed on a level of bringing in some of that philosophy from the original season, and it could have explored some of that if it made time for it, and it didn't because of the amount of exposition. Yeah. And I think because they'd come up with such a complicated plot that was trying to re-world build again in a new place in a very short space of time, which is kind of like Ghost in the Shell. So maybe they really were influenced by Mamoru Oshii. But I do think that they came up with a very believable world, and I like the idea of exploring the ways that system could be fucked with, or and I think one thing that it kind of made clear is that in the rest of the world, if everything's like falling apart and people are being killed, people are dying, there's guerrilla warfare, and a lot of anarchy, and that's when these sort of dictatorships and authoritarian regimes kind of come into power. That it does subtly bring up this like, well, what's worse?
Yeah.
And that's interesting, but it could have actually talked more about that.
Yeah, I feel like they kind of talk about it in the end when the Sibyl system is giving Akane the lecture through the Dominator, which is like how everything in Psycho-Pass ends. Like the Sibyl system lecturing Akane about like, yeah, it's kind of fucked up, but what else are you going to do? And then Akane's like, I'm going to try and work within the system. And it's like, great, thanks, Akane, you fucking nerd. But I think that they try to explain some of that stuff in the end of that when the Dominator is lecturing her. But like no one ever takes, at least in the Psycho-Pass materials that I've seen, no one takes down the Sibyl system. And I think that there is a post-credit scene to this movie that we didn't stick around for.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Twice?
Yeah. So apparently, so the ending of the movie is like Han is resigning, and he's like, I don't think that it's right that I'm a dictator. I'm going to let the people decide who should be in charge of the government. And I think in the post-credit scene, it's Kogami. He's listening to a radio, and Han has been reelected because that's all the people know.
Oh, really?
That's kind of interesting to explore, and it's just a post-credit scene.
Fascinating, yeah.
Yeah. So, who knows, dude? Who the fuck knows? But I think that's it for this episode. Thank you for listening to our episode on Psycho-Pass the movie. Definitely recommend checking out the series, at least the first season. It's very interesting. If you would please subscribe, rate and review on Apple Podcasts. I think that there's reviews on Spotify now, so do that.
Check out our YouTube clips.
YouTube channel. Just search for the Anime Movie Podcast. We post the whole podcast, and then we also do little clips with visuals that show like what we're talking about. Follow the Instagram at the Anime Movie Podcast if you want to write in, the Anime Movie Podcast at gmail.com. And I think that's all the plugs, right?
I think so.
All right. Well, thanks again for listening, everybody. See you next time.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Anime Movie Podcast. You can follow us on Instagram at the Anime Movie Podcast, and you can reach out via email at the Anime Movie Podcast at gmail.com. Please subscribe, rate, and review, and tell a friend. Thanks. Have a good one. Bye.